Welcome back to the deep dive. This is where we take a whole stack of stuff articles, notes, research, and try to pull out the real gems for you. And today we're embarking on something pretty fascinating, I think, a deep dive into the 70s and 80s, but specifically looking at that tension between our own memories, what we remember and what might have actually happened. It's quite a challenge, really, trying to pin down the essence of those decades.
It really is. And our mission today, if you like, is to explore that whole cultural landscape, especially the music, the musical identity of those times. But we're also bringing in a bit of a twist, thinking about how new tech, AI, might help us sort through all these different stories, these historical narratives about connecting the dots, understanding the why, and yeah, maybe even gently questioning our own memories a bit.
Definitely. So get ready because this deep dive, it's going to nudge you, the listener, to think about your own memories.
We'll explore some pre-cutting edge ways of looking at history with tech and really get into the art of capturing the spirit of an era. Let's get started.
Okay, so let's kick off with this idea. It's playful, but I think it's quite profound. Imagine feeding your own memories, your recollections of the 70s and 80s into some advanced AI, just to see what it says really happened. I have
Yeah.
to say, my own 70s memories, they could be completely off. I mean, totally inaccurate. I was pretty young back then. My view was limited.
Well, that's fascinating, isn't it? Because that experience is so common, but we all see it differently. Maybe your memories aren't wrong, just seen through a certain lens,
Mhm.
or maybe understating things. My feeling, actually, and you could argue this, is that the 70s, well, they might have been much better than you think they were. It really depends on where you were standing, so to speak.
Oh, really? Better. Hmm. That kind of goes against my pet theory about the 70s. Because the way I remember it, maybe slightly jokingly, is that in the 70s, you weren't allowed out, were you? You
Yeah.
couldn't just roam around experiencing all this better stuff. My world felt, well, smaller.
But I was allowed out. Definitely. I have this vivid memory, probably slightly embellished for comic effect, of running around with a bit of cardboard, sort of
Yeah.
playfully clubbing people with it. So yeah, freedom was definitely there, for some of us anyway, even if it involved cardboard weapons. Shows how different childhoods are, doesn't it?
Okay, cardboard clubbing aside, that's quite a memory. So my theory, right, is this. The 70s were okay, quite all right. But people only really got permission, socially speaking, to go out dancing, hit the clubs in the 1980s. And because of that, suddenly everyone thought, wow, the music's completely changed overnight.
Mm.
When actually, maybe the music hadn't shifted quite so dramatically. It was more about us being allowed or old enough to finally go out and hear it properly.
And that age factor you mentioned is just so, so critical. It completely shapes your view. I was the same, really. Very young in the 70s, practically still in nappies. But the 80s, oh, by then I was, well, I felt grown up, independent. I definitely got out of my naps by then. So yeah, my perception of the two decades, hugely different, just based on where I was in my own life.
It's amazing, isn't it, how our own personal timeline, just growing up, completely colors our view of history. Makes you wonder how much objective history is even possible. We filter it all through our own lives. So we're asking you, our listener, to think about this. Does that resonate with you, your memories at different times, even recent things? How much does your own experience, your age at the time, color what you remember as, the facts? It seems that we all have our own sort of personal history book.
Right. And that subjectivity, that very personal nature of memory, it leads to a really key question. How do we get beyond just, individual stories? How do we build a bigger picture, something more coherent, maybe even more objective? And what's really interesting now is the idea of using technology for this. Imagine uploading, say, bits of sound like this conversation or old interviews, archive audio into an AI system, something running in like a Google Colab notebook, a cloud environment. The
Mhm.
goal is basically to find the coherence, the patterns, the big themes in all that potentially messy anecdotal stuff.
That sounds really powerful. But how does an AI actually do that? How does it process something like a conversation or just sounds beyond simply, hearing it? What's the method?
Well, it's a lot more complex than just listening. These big AI models, especially the multimodal ones, they use a whole range of techniques. They use natural language processing, obviously, to understand the words, the speech patterns, the meaning. But they also analyze the audio signal itself, the tone of voice, background noise, rhythm, cadence. Then, using machine learning trained on, just vast amounts of human communication and historical data, the AI starts identifying themes, links, things that pop up again and again. It cross-references everything against this huge knowledge base it has. And only then does it try to synthesize a narrative, a kind of summary for us. That Google Notebook thing, Colab, it's just a tool, a platform where you can run these huge models on your own data.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense now. It's not passive. It's actively breaking down and rebuilding. And then there's that efficiency point you made earlier. It leaves out stuff it thinks isn't relevant.
Yeah.
You said like 20 minutes of input might only give you 5 minutes back. So it's discarding, what, 3/4 of what we say. That's incredibly efficient, but, does it risk losing something important, some nuance?
That is exactly the crucial point here. That ruthless efficiency, as you called it, it tells us something really important. When we ask an algorithm to summarize history, we're not just getting a shorter version, we're getting a specific interpretation. The AI's idea of relevance is shaping the story, and it makes you ask, well, what gets lost? What subtle points or perspectives might be missing when 75% is just gone? It gives you the gist, for sure. But is the gist the whole story? Probably not.
Yeah, that really challenges the idea of a complete record, doesn't it? So for these decades, the 70s and 80s, what's the specific task we give the AI? Is it about defining the sound, creating a sort of sonic profile?
Exactly that. The core mission would be explain the 1980s as a musical genre, and then compare it favorably, unfavorably, whatever, with other decades, purely based on the music. We'd want it to tackle big questions like, why were the 80s important musically? What did they contribute that was unique? And maybe, this is a bit more provocative, why did we even need the 80s? Could we, theoretically, have just skipped them, gone straight from the 70s sound to the 90s sound? Could music history have just jumped over them?
I love that. The idea of just, deleting a decade because an algorithm decided it wasn't relevant enough. It reminds me of those old chart shows, Top of the Pops or something, where the host might say, with a cheeky grin, right, I've decided numbers 14 down to 7 are a complete waste of space this week, so we're just skipping them.
Yeah.
That kind of decisive curation.
Precisely. A kind of brutal efficiency, almost dictatorial, applied to culture.
So this is something for you, the listener, to think about. If an AI analyzed your memories, maybe your teenage years, or historical periods you love, what do you think it would cut out? What parts of your story would it label irrelevant? And how might that final gist, that 5 minutes it gives back from your 20 point, how might that feel different from your own understanding, your own truth? It's a really deep question about what information actually matters.
Right, and that idea of the AI cutting 20 minutes down to 5, it makes me think maybe when we humans try to capture an era, we do that too, maybe unconsciously filtering out what doesn't fit our narrative. Which brings us to the art of consistency. Deliberately shaping and presenting an era's sound going beyond just raw data.
Yes, and it's vital to see how that deliberate crafting actually works, how a human curator shapes that experience. For, 25 years now, I've run the Folking 80s show on this platform, Access Serials, Friday evenings. And the key thing, maybe the reason it's lasted, is it was professional, consistent, right from the start. I had total control, nobody else interfering. I literally, lock the door, draw the curtains, metaphorically speaking, no interference. And because it worked right from the first show, I just kept doing it exactly the same way. And well, here we are, 25 years on, still doing that specific 80s sound.
That's amazing, really. Such dedication to a specific sound. But why so consistent? Why not, find new remixes? Or maybe tracks that didn't get released back then? Or even what those artists are doing now. Why not mix it up a bit to keep it, fresh? What was the thinking behind keeping it so static?
Well, mostly because I'm busy helping you with this deep dive right now, and I just have to sit here and look pretty. But no, seriously, it's all about preserving that specific, consistent style, that atmosphere. The second you start adding new stuff, remixes, modern takes, you risk, breaking the spell. You disrupt the vibe that people tune in for. It was exactly the same thinking when I did a 1940s show years ago, and obviously I wasn't around in the 1940s.
That's a great comparison. Doing a 40s show authentically without living through it.
Yeah.
That must have been tricky. How did you even go about developing the right style for a decade you only knew from history books or films?
Well, it was basically research and then almost a kind of performance. To get the authentic style of the program, I watched loads of old films, old newsreels. How did radio actually sound back then? I studied the announcers, their delivery, their phrasing, how they held themselves, and then I deliberately cultivated a voice for it, a slightly, posh, upper crust sort of voice. It just felt right for that wartime broadcasting style. Even practiced saying things like tally ho convincingly. So yes, with a hearty tally ho and trying to channel that spirit, off we went, presenting the 1940s as genuinely as I could. You have to immerse yourself in the delivery, not just the songs, to capture the era's feel. It's curation.
That's so interesting. It really shows it's not just the music itself, but the whole package, the way it's presented, the voice, the style that becomes part of how we perceive an era's sound. And that dedication, like with your shows, it points to a bigger thing about how eras get presented generally, doesn't it? In documentaries, museums, themed nights. So how does that deliberate crafting, that performance, that consistent storytelling, how does it shape our collective memory, our appreciation of a whole period? And just like that, we're bringing this particular deep dive towards its close. We've covered quite a bit, wandering through those hazy personal memories of the 70s and 80s. We've looked at how AI might, synthesize history from all sorts of data. And we've touched on that very human art of deliberately presenting a consistent historical sound, a consistent narrative. We've seen how our lives color the past, how tech might distill it, and how we humans try to define it. So I guess the question is, what does all this mean for us?
Well, maybe the final thought to leave you with is this. If our grasp of history is so tied up with our own personal, subjective experience, and at the same time, AI can offer us this filtered, coherent gist based on its own rules of what's relevant, what's our responsibility then as individuals? How do we hold both? How do we cherish those personal, maybe flawed, but emotionally real memories, while also trying to seek out a bigger picture, a more synthesized, maybe more objective truth, especially now when there's just so much information coming at us? It's definitely something worth thinking about as we try to make sense of the past and maybe how we approach the future too.